Hi, I'm Tracy Bowden from the ABC's Washington Bureau. In February this year, an 84-year-old Australian grandmother made the long journey from her home in Adelaide to testify before Congress here in DC. The Congressional hearing was the pinnacle in Jan Ruff-O'Herne's 15-year global campaign to seek justice for comfort women, women forced to be sex slaves for the Japanese military during World War II. We first met Jan in 2001 on Australian Story. Now, 6 years on, Jan feels she's one step closer to finally achieving her purpose.
My faith has always been the backbone of my whole life.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Singing is the best way to praise God. You praise God by a song. You can't beat that.
The thing about my mother, she's 84 years old and she has an astonishing energy and a sense of love and goodwill about her that is quite special.
Sometimes God asks of us late in life to do an amazing task. And this has come to me late in life, you know.
Mum always said to us, even when we were really small, one day I'm going to write my story and people will be interested. And we'd say, oh, sure, Mum, you know. And, of course, one day she did tell her story and we were amazed. It changed all of our lives, really, and I'm so glad she spoke out.
I grew up in the former Dutch East Indies, which is now called Indonesia. I was born in 1923, and I had the most wonderful childhood.
My grandfather took a lot of films in Java. In those films you can see my mother as a young girl wearing a big Dutch bow in her hair, dancing around in a party frock before the war, before anything happened that was unpleasant, and the future was so positive. Well, she always used to tell us stories of Java, always. That goes right throughout my childhood. And we used to love looking at the photographs of the beautiful big house and, yeah, the servants which people had, you know, to do your cooking and washing and gardening and a chauffeur. And we were always enthralled with these, you know, to hear these stories, and it fascinated us. And we were quite happy to think, oh, well, that was the life my mother had. But nothing at all, no hint to indicate that something as shocking as this had happened to her. My mother's a very beautiful woman. She's really attractive, and as a young woman she was stunning. And in a sense, sometimes I think that her beauty has also been her disguise. We knew all along that she'd been in prison camp. I've never seen my mother as someone with a terrible past that she was hiding from me. Not a hint. It was a perfectly kept secret. There were some things that didn't make any sense, like my mother always used to say when it was a birthday or Mother's Day, and we'd say, what do you want for a present? She'd say, oh, just don't give me flowers. They're such a waste of money. Don't give me flowers. And we couldn't understand that. Everybody loves flowers. Every mother loves getting flowers.
When the war in the Pacific started, and then the Japanese invaded Java in March 1942, and that is when all the beautiful life finished, because the Japanese put all civilians, not just the men, but all women and children into Japanese prison camps. And I was with my family. I was interned for 3.5 years in the Japanese prison camps. Starvation, torture, punishments, illnesses. You know, I saw somebody dying every day. Oh, you've got all the paintings hanging up.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Well, you'd like to see, this is all the latest stuff.
Beautiful.
And they're all the Java paintings. After the war, She was located to Holland, as were all the Dutch people who'd been interned in Japanese camps.
It's gorgeous.
This is the end of an era, isn't it? The end. Me saying goodbye to Java when I had to leave there when the war was over.
But because she'd met my father, who was an English soldier, she moved to England to marry Dad. In 1960, my family migrated to Australia. The first hint I had of it was when my aunt from Holland came to stay with us in Sydney, and we were chatting in bed one night, and my aunt said to me, "Something happened to your mother in the camp, but I promised never to tell you, and I can't tell you till after she's died." And I lay there in the darkness, and I didn't want to know what it was, really. I didn't push her for it.
Their heavy armour rumbled across the Kosovo countryside this morning.
In 1992, 50 years on, I remember hearing on the news that the war in Bosnia had broken out, and women were being raped. Then I saw on television the Korean comfort women, the South Korean comfort women were the first ones to speak out. And I watched them here in my living room. And they wanted justice and compensation and an apology more than anything else. They wanted an apology from the Japanese government. And I thought they weren't getting anywhere. They were getting nowhere. And I thought, I must back up these women. Now it's time to speak out. There was going to be an international hearing on Japanese war crimes to be held in December 1992 in Tokyo. And I was asked, would I be a witness? But before I could do that, because I had to tell my family, I had to tell Eileen and Carol. You know, how can you tell your daughters? The shame was still so great, you know. I knew I had to tell them, but I couldn't tell them face to face.
One day my mother came up to my husband's shop and gave him an envelope and just mysteriously said, "I'll give this to Eileen to read tonight." So I opened the envelope up and there was 2 articles from Dutch newspapers with headlines about shocking revelations of Dutch women being used as sex slaves during the war. And I just couldn't associate, why have I been given this to read? What is this about? Why has my mother given me this? And as I read the articles, I just got so angry inside. I can feel it now. This anger just surged up inside me. I could see there was also a large amount of handwritten notes by my mother, which was in fact 30 pages. And it was all in Mum's handwriting and it was called Cry of the Raped. I saw the title and I flicked through really quickly till I found the crucial pages where it actually said the story, where she'd written her story. As it so turned out, it was exactly what I had feared. And all the time as I was reading, I was saying, no, not this, not this. And I was throwing the sheets of paper on it. And I can't believe the anger because I'm not an angry person. Tears were just streaming down my face. I don't think I've ever cried so much in my whole life. I must have used a whole box of tissues. And I literally threw the sheets on the table as I read the horrors that she had written about what had happened to her and how she was, in fact, one of these Dutch girls. What I really felt was horror, shock and horror, that these things could have happened to such a beautiful person as my mother. All I'm thinking is, this is not my mother. My mother is this beautiful, strong person. Nobody could do that to her. That's not what's happened. That's not what I've heard. That's not the story of prison camp that I know.
I've been in the camp 2 years. They gave an order that all the young girls from 17 years and up had to line up in the compound. these high military officers walked towards us and started to eye us up and down, looking at our figures, looking at our legs, and it was obviously a selection process that was going to take place. We were forced onto this open truck and just driven away in this open truck as if we were cattle. And I remember we were so scared, we were all clinging, to our little suitcases and clinging to each other. And the truck stopped in front of a large Dutch colonial house. And we were told to get out. When we got into the house, we were told we were there for the sexual pleasure of the Japanese military. In fact, we found ourselves in a brothel. It was a brothel. And, our whole world just collapsed from under our feet. And we started protesting straight away. We said that we were forced into this, that they couldn't do this to us. Had no right to do this. It was against the Geneva Convention. And that we would never do this. But they just laughed at us, just laughed. I mean, they said they could do with us what they liked. We were given flower names, and they were pinned on our doors, I can't remember my Japanese flower name. I just didn't even want to know about it. They started to drag us away one by one. And I could hear all the screaming coming from the bedrooms, and you just wait for your turn, And there stood this large, fat, bald Japanese officer looking at me, grinning at me, and I put up an enormous fight, but he just dragged me to the bedroom. And I said, I'm not going to do this. And he said, well, I will kill you. If you don't give yourself to me, I will kill you. And he actually got out his sword. I went on my knees and to say my prayers, and I felt God very close. I wasn't afraid to die. And as I was praying, he had no intention of killing me, of course. He just, threw me on the bed. He got hold of me, threw me on the bed, and just tore off all my clothes. And just brutally raped me. And I thought he would never stop. It was the most horrendous. I never thought suffering could be that terrible. And eventually he left the room, and I was in total shock. And when I got to the bathroom, all the other girls were there. We were all there in the bathroom, all in total hysterical and crying and trying to wash away the dirt, the shame. Within one night, we lost our youth. We lost our innocence, our youth. We were just such a pitiful little group of girls.
After I'd read the story, I drove over to my mother's house, and I just put my arms around her and cried and cried. I couldn't speak. I just was I couldn't say anything. Nothing would have been enough. There was nothing. Just putting my arms around her, I guess, was words enough.
All these years I was too ashamed. You think, what will they think of me? I can't tell this. What will they think of me? And then to get that wonderful reaction, of their embrace. It's all told in the embrace. The fear. I'll never forget that fear. It runs right through your body like electrical currents. And it's a fear that has never left me. It's been with me all my life. I can feel that fear sometimes at night when I just sit here in my lounge room looking out through the window and it's getting dark. Because when it's getting dark, it means I'm going to be raped over and over again. And even now when I see it getting dark at night, I can still feel that fear coming over me, It's never really left me. You come to a stage where you think, I've tried everything. What can I do? What can I do next? I cut off all my hair. I thought if I make myself look as ugly as possible, nobody will want me. And I looked absolutely horrible, really ugly. And the other girls, they said, oh, Jannie, what have you done? What have you done? I said, well, perhaps they won't want me now. It turned me into a curiosity object. And they wanted me even more because I was the girl that cut her hair off, that, the bold girl, We all want the bold girl. It had just the opposite effect for some reason or other. So it didn't do me any good at all. At one stage, I remember sitting in the brothel, and it was almost getting dark, and I got this handkerchief out, and I asked the other girls, would they please all write their names on this handkerchief? And they did. I wanted to have something of them forever. I wanted to have something solid to remember them with forever. So they all wrote their name on the handkerchief, and I embroidered over this handkerchief. One day we were told to pack our belongings again, and we were there put in the transit camp. I was there reunited with my mother and my two younger sisters. And to see my mother again, after all that time. And my mother looked at my bald head, and she feared the worst. And that first night, I couldn't even talk or say anything to her. I can feel it now, laying in my mother's arms, in the hollow of her arms, her arms around me. And she just stroked my head, she just kept stroking my bald head. And I just lay there in the safety of my mother's arms. And we didn't speak. We just lay there. And then the next day I told her what had happened to me. And so did the other girls. We had all these girls with all these mothers, and the mothers just couldn't cope with the story. This happened to their daughters, It was too much for them. They couldn't cope with it. And we were only ever to tell our mothers just once. And it was never talked about again. It was just too much for them. The things that the girls can look back on now. After I told them, they said, oh, Mom, now I know. Oh, these are flowers. Oh, daisies. Oh, they're so beautiful. Yeah, and also with the flowers, always say, don't give me any flowers. Now they realize why. And now I love to get flowers, And because I've spoken out now, now I can enjoy flowers. The best thing that God did to me is giving me Tom. It's a proper sort of war romance, and one that worked out well. He was such a lovely, gentle person, and when I told Tom what happened to me, it didn't matter to Tom. He loved me for what I was, and to be accepted so totally, no matter what. Don't you just love a man like that? Yeah. I wasn't dirty. I wasn't soiled. I wasn't different. Not in Tom's eyes. I was just beautiful in Tom's eyes, and he was beautiful to me. Yeah. When I married Tom, I wanted a house, I wanted a husband, I wanted a family, but I didn't want sex, And that was the last thing I wanted. So Tom had to be very patient with me. In the first years of my married life were very hard. Altogether, I had 4 miscarriages because my body was in such a terrible condition, and I had to have major operation before I could even carry through it, and have a baby. And now I have these 2 beautiful daughters, Eileen and Carol.
Her marriage to my father was really, really happy. My father had a very bad car accident. So she had another cross to bear, which went for about 20 years, where she had to nurse him when he wasn't a well man.
It was my deep faith in God that helped me survive all that I suffered. More anxiety came. Since 1992, when I first spoke out in Tokyo, I made up my mind that for the rest of my life I would campaign for the plight of the comfort women and for the protection of women in war, because every time there is a war, women are the victims again.
Her life has 100% changed.
It's very emotional to walk here, isn't it? Very emotional.
She has worked tirelessly for the rights of women who have been raped in war.
Only those that have experienced a war understand what these names stand for.
Would you like to come around and have a look at where your handkerchief is displayed?
It's not easy. I'm not young. I'm getting old. But I feel it's so important that our voices be heard. This is where it belongs, you know. It was sort of hard to part with it. But at the same time, you know, I've given it now to the War Memorial. And, this is where it should be. It's got such a story to tell. That handkerchief has such a story to tell.
Would you like me to remove it for you so you could have a closer look?
Could I really touch it again? I'd love to hold it.
We thought it was a special occasion that you were visiting really carefully, so it's actually mounted on a board, and I need to wear gloves, but on this occasion you don't have to wear gloves.
Yes. There's my name, Jan. There's Lies. I said all the rosaries with Lies. Gertie. She was only 18. Bertha, Marie, Ellie, and Grace. And those names are forever in my heart. Yeah. It's lovely to hold it again. Thank you. That is really good. Yeah. Time is running out for these comfort women. They're all getting old. They are like my heart and my soul, you know. We suffered this together. We went through this together. I will do anything for them.
Since the last Australian story, which was, I think, 6 years ago, Jan has continued her campaign, and she's also received an Order of Australia and a Anzac Peace Prize. She's had a knighthood from the Dutch government. Just a few weeks ago, she was asked to go to Washington and address Congress at the invitation of a congressman named Mike Honda. He is very supportive of their cause, and I think he's been very influential and helpful in getting this issue back into international focus.
The trip to Washington was the pinnacle of all my speaking out. This was mine and nobody. I was just so excited, and I just thought, I've got to do this, and I've got to do it right. I have forgiven the Japanese for what they did to me, but I can never forget. Their apology has never been followed.
It was an appalling issue, incident, facet of a tragic period. I've read testimony given by the Australian lady to the Congressional investigation, and it's quite harrowing.
When I heard that Mr. Howard was going to visit Tokyo and that he was going to bring this comfort women issue up with Mr. Abe, I was just so thrilled.
What my mother wants from the Japanese government is not just an apology. Another apology has just come through last week.
私はもう常々申し上げておりますように、慰安婦の方々が舐められた、新さんを舐められたわけでありまして、ご同情申し上げますし、当時そういう状況に置かれたことにつきましてはお詫びを申し上げている通りであります。
We want the Japanese government to admit that these women were forcibly recruited and press-ganged into these terrible places where these young women were abused for such long periods of their entire lives were ruined. An apology is not enough. The trouble with people like my mother is that for a long time they've carried a sense of shame because you feel that somehow you've done something wrong. And they haven't done anything wrong. But that can be righted if someone admits that they were forced.
We want our dignity back, you know. It's a small thing to ask. And I think if Shinzo Abe would do this, he would make himself very popular in his own country.
I think that my mother's message has gone right through to my daughter's generation. I'd like to tell Prime Minister Abe that if you can sit out and wait for all these old women to die, but then there's another generation of women to follow them and another one after me. We'll all continue our mother's work, that's what we do.
When people hear my story, I think the message, the great message, is the message of faith and forgiveness. And that these things will never happen again. That is why I tell these stories. I never want any other women to suffer as I did.